You've probably heard that skydiving is safer than driving. Statistically, that's actually true. In 2024, only 9 people died skydiving in the entire United States, a record low. But those statistics don't tell you what happens when things go catastrophically wrong at 10,000 feet. And some of these deaths are so bizarre, so preventable, and so disturbing that they fundamentally change how the sport operates. Let's start with the man who forgot the one thing you absolutely cannot forget. April 2nd, 1988, Franklin County Sports Parachute Center in North Carolina. Ivan McGuire was a 35-year-old telecommunications worker who'd completed over 800 jumps. He wasn't some reckless amateur. This was his third jump of the day, and he was filming a student and instructor for a training video. The camera was mounted to his helmet, voice activated, recording everything. The plane climbed to 10,500 feet. The door opened. Wind rushed through the cabin. Ivan positioned himself, checked his camera, and jumped. For the first 30 seconds, everything felt normal. He was filming the student below him, tracking their form, doing his job. The rush of freefall, the familiar sensation of terminal velocity. He'd done this hundreds of times before. Then he reached for his ripcord. His hand found nothing but empty air. The camera captured his last words perfectly. Oh my God, no. Ivan McGuire had jumped out of a plane without a parachute. He'd strapped on his camera equipment, which weighed about the same as a parachute rig, felt that familiar weight on his back, and assumed he was good to go. None of the other 11 jumpers on the plane noticed. He didn't notice. Not until it was far too late to do anything about it. He fell 10,500 feet and died on impact. The FAA investigation concluded it was entirely accidental, a fatal mistake born from routine and muscle memory. You do something 800 times, your brain starts running on autopilot. And sometimes, autopilot kills you. But here's what makes this even more unsettling. This wasn't the only time someone's made a seemingly impossible error at altitude. Jump back further. February 4th, 1912, the Eiffel Tower in Paris. A crowd has gathered because Franz Reichelt, an Austro-Hungarian tailor living in France, has announced he's going to test his invention. He designed a wearable parachute suit, something aviators could wear that would deploy and save their lives if their aircraft failed. His early test with dummies dropped from his 5th-floor apartment had worked, but he couldn't replicate that success. So he petitioned the Parisian police for permission to test from the Eiffel Tower. They said yes, assuming he'd use dummies again. He arrived wearing the suit. Cameras were rolling. This is one of the earliest filmed deaths in history, and you can still watch the footage today. The police tried to talk him out of it. His friends begged him to reconsider, but Reichelt was convinced his design would work. He climbed to the first platform, 57 meters up. He stood at the edge, the suit already partially deployed around him like fabric wings. Then he hesitated. For 40 seconds he stood there looking down, working up the courage. Finally, he jumped. The parachute never opened. It just fluttered uselessly as he accelerated toward the frozen ground below. The impact was so severe that witnesses reported his right leg and arm were crushed, his skull and spine shattered, blood pouring from his mouth, nose, and ears. He left a measurable crater in the hard earth where he landed. The newspapers called him the Flying Tailor. He'd killed himself testing an invention that was never going to work, in front of a crowd, on camera, despite everyone telling him not to. Individual deaths are tragic, but what happens when the system itself is broken? The Lodi Parachute Center in California has been linked to 28 deaths since 1985. 28. That's not a skydiving center. That's a statistical anomaly that somehow keeps operating. In 2016, Tyler Turner was 18 years old. His mom bought him a tandem skydive as a high school graduation present. Tandem jumps are supposed to be the safest option. You're literally strapped to an experienced instructor who handles everything. The odds of dying on a tandem jump are about 1 in 500,000. Tyler and his instructor boarded the plane, climbed to 13,000 feet, and jumped. The parachute never opened. Both of them fell the entire distance and died on impact. When investigators reviewed the footage and examined what happened, they discovered something horrifying. Tyler's instructor was unlicensed. He didn't know what to do when the main chute malfunctioned. Professional skydivers who analyzed the video said it was completely preventable. The instructor wasn't properly trained, he panicked, and an 18-year-old kid died because of it. The founder of Lodi Parachute Center later admitted in interviews that the first 2 or 3 deaths at his facility kept him up at night. But after that, he stopped feeling remorse. Since Tyler's death, 6 more people have died there. His family was awarded a $40 million judgment in 2021. They haven't seen a cent, and the facility is still operating. The pattern at places like Lodi isn't unique. Skydive Cross Keys in New Jersey has recorded 11 deaths since 2002. In September 2004, Craig Kuski died when his parachute failed to open. He'd been jumping for 10 years. The autopsy revealed his blood alcohol level was 0.16%, more than twice the legal driving limit. He jumped drunk. In 2012, Donald Morozin, a certified skydiver with over 3,500 jumps, fell to his death after never attempting to open his parachute at all. Investigators couldn't determine why. 3,500 jumps. That's not inexperience, that's something else entirely. Here's what makes skydiving deaths particularly unsettling. They're almost never about equipment failure. The automatic activation device, a backup system that deploys your reserve parachute if you're falling too fast at low altitude, has prevented an estimated 1,200 deaths since the 1990s. The gear works. Modern parachutes are remarkably reliable. What fails is human judgment. Dr. Jean Potvin published a study in 2024 analyzing skydiving fatalities. He found that low-turn incidents where experienced jumpers try to execute aggressive high-performance maneuvers close to the ground cause about 25% of all deaths. Nearly every single one involved someone with over 100 jumps. They'd survived enough times that they stopped respecting how quickly things can go wrong. Landing accounts for more than a third of all fatalities. You fall from 13,000 feet, your parachute opens perfectly, you're gliding smoothly, and then you misjudge your approach in the final seconds and slam into the ground at a fatal angle. In 2022, 60% of skydiving deaths were landing problems, and half of all deaths that year involved skydivers with D licenses, meaning they had at least 500 jumps. Experience doesn't protect you. Sometimes it makes you reckless. Then, there are the disasters that shouldn't have happened at all. August 27, 1967, 18 skydivers boarded a civilian B-25 Mitchell bomber for a jump over Ortner Airport in Ohio. The pilot couldn't see the ground through heavy cloud cover, so he radioed Cleveland Air Traffic Control for guidance. They confirmed his position. He was over the airport. The jumpers, all experienced, all certified by the United States Parachute Association, jumped through the clouds. Jumping through cloud cover violated FAA rules, but they trusted the pilot. At 4,000 feet, they punched through the bottom of the cloud layer. They weren't over the airport. They were over Lake Erie. 17 of them frantically tried to shed their heavy gear before hitting the water. Only 2 managed to stay afloat long enough to be rescued. 16 drowned. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation found that air traffic control had confused the B-25 with a Cessna that was in the area to photograph the jump. They gave the pilot the wrong position. The pilot wasn't even rated to fly a B-25. The plane wasn't certified to carry passengers. Everything about the jump was wrong, and 16 people died because of it. It remains one of the deadliest incidents in recreational skydiving history. The sport has gotten safer. In 2024, 9 people died skydiving in the United States. That's the lowest number ever recorded. Out of roughly 3.65 million jumps in 2023, there were 10 fatalities. The odds are about 0.27 deaths per 100,000 jumps. Globally, it's estimated between 80 and 120 people die skydiving each year. If you're doing a tandem jump strapped to a licensed instructor, your odds of dying are about 1 in 500,000. But those numbers don't tell you about the places where standards slip. They don't account for the instructors who aren't properly trained, the jumpers who get overconfident, or the moments where a single lapse in judgment ends everything. The difference between walking away and dying can come down to whether you turned left instead of right in the final 3 seconds before landing. That's how thin the margin is. Most people will never jump out of a plane, but for those who do, the risk isn't in the fall itself. It's in the overconfidence that comes after you've survived it 100 times. It's in the facilities that cut corners because nobody's forcing them to stop. It's in the split-second decisions you make at 200 feet that you can't take back. Skydiving is safer than it's ever been, and statistically safer than your drive to the drop zone. But when it goes wrong, there's no airbag, no second chance, no room for error. The sky doesn't care how experienced you are, and the ground doesn't forgive mistakes.